I should probably thank Martha for harassing me. If it weren't for her bizarre obsession with my houseboat, I never would have discovered she'd been stealing money from the entire neighborhood. It was 6 o'clock on a Tuesday morning when 3 police boats pulled up beside my perfectly legal floating home. And there was Martha Hendricks, standing on her dock in full tennis whites like she was headed to the country club, pointing at me like I was some kind of pirate raiding her precious lakefront. Her voice cut through the mist via bullhorn. That floating trailer is destroying our property values. Here's what really gets me. This woman spent 3 straight years terrorizing her neighbors over things like lawn ornaments and the paint color of docks, while quietly embezzling $127,000, yes, down to the last cent, from the very community she pretended to protect. The audacity was something to behold. But Martha made one fatal mistake. She assumed the divorce guy living on a houseboat would be an easy target. What she didn't know was that I had time, tech skills, and nothing left to lose. What would you do if your HOA tried to ban you from your own lake? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. But first, let me rewind a bit and explain how I ended up living on a houseboat in the first place. My name's Jake Morrison. I'm 45, and about 6 months ago, my entire life flipped upside down. My 20-year marriage ended in a divorce that left me with half my savings and a desperate need for a fresh start. Sometimes life throws you a curveball, and sometimes it throws you exactly what you need. My grandfather's old A-frame cabin on Lake Serenity had been sitting vacant since he passed away 2 years earlier. I inherited it but never had the time to deal with it, too busy working and trying to salvage a crumbling marriage. But when everything fell apart, that little cabin started to look like salvation. The only problem? It needed major repairs. The roof was shot, the electrical was outdated, the foundation had issues. We're talking months of hard work before it could be livable. Enter the houseboat. I'm a software developer by trade, but I've always been handy. On weekends, I'd build custom furniture or restore vintage cars. So I thought, why not build a floating home while I fix up the cabin? The smell of fresh sawdust mixed with morning coffee became my new normal. And waking up to the call of loons across a still lake? Beats rush hour traffic any day of the week. Lake Serenity's a decent-sized community, about 200 homes dotting the shoreline. It's a mix of longtime residents, weekenders with their fishing boats, and retirees who moved up from the city looking for some peace and quiet. Most people get along just fine. Most people. Then there's the Pineview Shores HOA. They control about 60% of the lakefront properties, including some of the most expensive real estate. And that's where Martha Hendricks reigns over her tiny kingdom. Martha moved here 3 years ago after retiring from some high-level position at a bank in the city. Picture the textbook definition of an HOA president: blonde hair that never moves, nails always perfectly manicured, and a smile that never quite touches her eyes. She lives in the biggest house on the lake with her husband, Roger, a man so dull you could confuse him with background noise. Here's the thing about Martha. She's got a pattern. In her 3 years as HOA president, she's systematically gone after anyone who doesn't fit her vision of proper lakefront living. The Martinez family got warning letters because their dock decorations were too colorful. Mr. Peterson, who's 83 and doing his best, received daily complaints about his unkempt yard. And that satisfying crunch of gravel under your feet at the community boat launch. Martha wanted it paved, said it wasn't aesthetically pleasing. During my first week living on the water, she showed up at my dock, clipboard in hand and that trademark artificial smile plastered on her face. "Mr. Morrison," she said sweetly, "I'm sure you understand that your little boat project raises some concerns about precedent and community standards." I calmly explained that my grandfather's property predated the HOA's jurisdiction, and everything I'd built was completely legal under county maritime codes. Her smile tightened just a fraction. "Well," she replied, "we'll just have to see about that, won't we?" And that was the beginning of the harassment. It started with daily photo ops, Martha snapping pictures of my houseboat from every angle. Then came the noise complaints, filed every time I ran my generator, which, by the way, was solar-powered and dead silent 90% of the time. She began calling me out at community meetings, not by name, of course, but with carefully chosen language about certain individuals disturbing the peaceful lifestyle the rest of the lake enjoyed. I remember standing barefoot on the weathered cedar planks of my grandfather's old dock, watching her car disappear down the gravel path after that first confrontation. I knew right then this wasn't going to be over quickly. Martha had that look, like no one had ever told her no in her life, and she wasn't about to start accepting it now. What I didn't know yet was that her obsession with my houseboat was about to uncover something much bigger than petty HOA drama. But we'll get to that. 2 weeks into her surveillance campaign, Martha decided to take things up a notch. One calm morning, I was out on the lake adjusting the angle of my solar panels when I heard the unmistakable whine of boat engines, several of them, approaching fast. I looked up to see a Coast Guard cutter, a Sheriff's Department Marine unit, and Martha herself bringing up the rear in her pristine pontoon boat, like she was leading a military parade. The Coast Guard lieutenant, a young guy in his mid-20s with that serious look they must practice in training, pulled alongside and called out, "Sir, we've received reports that your vessel may be in violation of maritime safety regulations." I welcomed them aboard for a full inspection. And that's where Martha's little plan blew up in her face. When you build something yourself, you tend to go overboard on the safety features. My floating home was no exception. It had redundant bilge pumps, a professional-grade electrical system, Coast Guard-approved navigation lights, fire suppression systems, the works. 20 minutes later, the Coast Guard lieutenant was shaking my hand. "Mr. Morrison, this is some of the finest craftsmanship I've seen in 15 years of inspections. Mind if I ask who did the electrical work?" "That would be me," I said, glancing over at Martha, whose face was now 3 distinct shades of red as she hovered on her pontoon boat. Software development pays the bills, but I've always been a hands-on guy. The morning mist clung to the air with that metallic lake taste as Martha sputtered something about community standards and the dangers of precedent. The officer just gave her that calm, practiced look, the kind you reserve for particularly difficult children. But then came the mini twist that changed everything. While the lieutenant was filling out his glowing inspection report, he casually mentioned something strange. They hadn't just received one complaint about my boat. They'd received several, filed under different names, different addresses, same phrasing, same handwriting. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just HOA politics. This was targeted harassment. And now, it was officially documented. That afternoon, I filed my own report with the county clerk's office. That's when I discovered something beautiful, something called selective enforcement. See, if an HOA is shown to enforce rules against specific residents while ignoring identical violations from others, they can lose all legal authority to enforce any of those restrictions. In other words, Martha's crusade had opened the door for her own undoing. So I started documenting everything. Photos with timestamps, audio recordings, where legal, written summaries of every interaction. My software background came in handy. I built a private database that would make a seasoned detective jealous. Every incident got a tag, date, time, witnesses, quotes, references to specific HOA bylaws. And in a community like ours, word travels fast. Within a week, I had 3 neighbors quietly approach me with their own Martha horror stories. Turns out, I wasn't her only target. Not even close. Mrs. Chen, over on the East Shore, Martha reported her grandson's kayak as an unlicensed watercraft last summer, then filed noise complaints every time she started her fishing boat before 7 a.m., even though she's been launching at dawn for 30 years. The Martinez family. Martha tried to shut down their family reunions because too many cars were parked in their driveway. Every story added another layer to the same pattern, blatant, biased enforcement. A pattern any civil rights lawyer would love to pick apart. But Martha wasn't done escalating. 2 days after the Coast Guard visit, she called for an emergency HOA meeting. Naturally, I showed up. The community center was packed. About 60 residents in squeaky folding chairs, murmuring with curiosity. Martha stood at the front, flanked by a projector setup that screamed corporate PowerPoint culture, charts, graphs, even property value projections. "Fellow residents," she began, her voice oozing manufactured concern, "we are facing a precedent that could fundamentally alter the character of our community." She paused for dramatic effect. If we allow non-traditional watercraft to proliferate, what's next? Floating parties? Commercial operations? She drew in a breath and delivered the punchline with theatrical weight. Trailer parks? A ripple of murmurs ran through the room. Some people in the room nodded along, clearly worried about their property values. But others started to look uneasy with how blatantly Martha was targeting me. At the back of the room, Roger, Martha's husband, looked like he wanted to melt into his folding chair and disappear. When the floor opened for questions, I stood up. I kept my tone calm, voice steady, and asked just one question. Martha, could you please explain why my legally built, Coast Guard-approved houseboat violates community standards, but the Henderson's pontoon dock, which extends 15 feet past the legal setback line, doesn't seem to warrant any HOA action? Dead silence. Martha's mouth opened, then closed again, like a fish gasping for air. She hadn't expected me to come prepared. Knowledge nugget. Always document your interactions with the HOA. Selective enforcement is their legal Achilles heel. That night, as I drove past the still water of the lake, I realized something had changed. This wasn't just about my right to live on a houseboat anymore. It was about standing up to the kind of petty tyrant who tears apart communities one harassment letter at a time. Martha's reaction to being publicly cornered was predictable. She doubled down. 3 days after the meeting, I got a certified letter in the mail announcing an emergency HOA vote on new watercraft restrictions. The timing was suspicious. It gave exactly 30 days' notice for a vote that would ban all non-traditional watercraft from HOA-controlled properties. And that's where Martha made her second big mistake. She assumed everyone would back her property values above all agenda. What she didn't count on were the old-timers, people who'd lived on this lake long before HOA meant anything more than a few neighbors agreeing to mow their lawns and fix their docks. Over the next 2 weeks, I did something Martha had never even attempted. I talked to people. No campaign speeches, no PowerPoints, just real conversations. Over morning coffee, quick chats at the boat launch, casual talks while folks were fixing their docks. Turns out, Bob Peterson, the 83-year-old widower Martha kept hassling over his yard, was a retired electrician. He'd wired half the original cabins around the lake. One evening, we sat together watching his granddaughter reel in bluegill from his dock. "Son," he said, "I've got 3 fishing boats, 2 jet skis, and a pontoon. According to Martha's new rules, I'd have to get rid of everything but the pontoon. I've been fishing this lake for 40 years. Ain't starting over now." The Martinez family had their own worries. Their big family get-togethers always involved kayaks, canoes, and a couple of smaller fishing boats, none of which technically fit Martha's traditional watercraft category. Mrs. Martinez said it best, "We came here to enjoy the lake with our children and grandchildren." When did that become controversial? And then came the twist that changed everything. While I was building quiet, grassroots resistance to Martha's vote, I started digging into the HOA's finances. My divorce had taught me a hard lesson. When someone gets irrationally aggressive about money, there's almost always a deeper reason. HOA bylaws required financial transparency. So, I filed an official request for the past 3 years' budgets and expense reports. What I found explained everything. The numbers didn't add up. Lake beautification, $40,000 over 2 years. That was the first red flag. I'd driven the entire perimeter of the lake. Beautification? Where? Most docks looked like they hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint, or even a broom, since the early 2000s. Lake maintenance? $25,000 annually. Same story. The lake wasn't exactly in poor shape, but if someone was pocketing that kind of money, they certainly weren't spending it on anything visible. Then I found the kicker. Administrative consulting fees, $18,000. Sent to a company called Lakefront Property Management Solutions. A quick Google search revealed the punchline. Lakefront Property Management Solutions was owned by none other than Martha's brother-in-law. Knowledge nugget. Most HOA boards violate financial transparency laws at some point. A simple audit request can unravel years of mismanagement, especially when no one expects you to look. The night of the big vote, the community center was over capacity. People stood in the back, packed shoulder to shoulder. Folding chairs scraped the old linoleum floor as folks squeezed in. The stale smell of burnt coffee mixed with nervous tension in the air. Martha, naturally, had another elaborate presentation. There were before and after photos of lakes that had maintained their standards. Graphs, projections, all of it wrapped in the same sugar-coated language she always used to disguise control as concern. But when it came time to vote, something beautiful happened. Bob Peterson stood up, leaning on his walker, and addressed the room. "I've been living on this lake since 1987. Back then, we helped each other fix our docks and shared fish stories over beer. Now, we're voting on whether my fishing boat fits someone's idea of traditional. This ain't about property values, folks. This is about whether we're still neighbors or just taxpayers in somebody else's kingdom." That was all it took. The vote failed, 47 to 23. Martha's face cycled through a spectrum of colors I didn't even know was humanly possible. Red, pink, pale, blotchy purple, it was all there. But losing the vote wasn't the end of it. It just marked the beginning of what I call her desperation phase. Less than a week later, I received a letter. Not from the HOA, but from a high-priced law firm in the city. Not some local attorney familiar with lake communities or rural politics. No, this was a kind of firm with a name that sounded like a country club and partners who billed $4,000 an hour just to threaten people on embossed stationery. The letter was packed with intimidating legal jargon. The gist of it? They were threatening to sue me personally for creating a public nuisance and interfering with HOA governance. According to them, I had 30 days to remove my boat, or face legal action. I read the letter twice. Then I did something that probably wasn't the smartest move, but it felt amazing. I laughed, sitting on my deck with a mug of coffee, watching a great blue heron stalk the shallows. I laughed out loud at the absurdity of it all. Because here's the thing. Threatening to sue someone who's been through a brutal, drawn-out divorce is like threatening to starve someone who's already lost 50 pounds. I'd been to legal hell and back. This was just a Tuesday. But Martha's lawyer had made the same mistake she always made. They assumed I hadn't done my homework. While they were busy looking for ways to tear down my boat, I'd been building a case file, documenting every HOA code violation, every instance of selective enforcement, every shady financial detail I could uncover. And I was about to discover something that would change everything. Martha's legal team spent 3 weeks scouring every law, code, and regulation they could find. County building codes, state maritime restrictions, federal waterway statutes. They turned over every rock, desperate to find anything they could use against me. What the lawyers found instead was the kind of irony that makes you believe in cosmic justice. Not only was my boat fully legal, it was built better and more compliant than half the structures around the lake. But that deep dive research had an unexpected side effect. See, when you pay expensive lawyers to dig into regional property codes, they sometimes uncover things you weren't looking for. Things you definitely didn't want them to find. Like the fact that Martha's own dock violated county setback regulations by 12 feet. The twist hit like a bolt of lightning the moment their legal report arrived in my mailbox. I flipped through it expecting more recycled threats, but there it was. Page 37. A full-color, professionally drafted survey of the lake. Satellite images, property boundary overlays, dock measurements, and right there in black and white, Martha Hendristock, the very one she stood on to shout into her bullhorn and report my boat, was extending well into protected public waterway. 12 feet past the legal boundary. But it got even better. Turns out the county had been trying to crack down on encroaching structures for the past 2 years as part of an environmental protection initiative. Martha's dock? It was already on the county's enforcement list. That same week brought even more good news. HOA board elections were coming up, and thanks to Martha's campaign of bullying, I had way more support than I expected. People were done being pushed around. Bob Peterson nominated me himself. "Jake's the first person in years who stood up to the nonsense around here," he said. "Maybe it's time we put someone on the board who actually reads the bylaws." Election night felt more like a block party than a community meeting. People brought cookies, banana bread, and coffee that didn't taste like it came out of a vending machine in a hospital basement. The air buzzed with energy and cautious optimism. And when the results came in, Jake Morrison, 78% of the vote. The applause went on so long I thought my ears might start ringing. Martha sat in the front row, frozen, like someone had just told her Christmas was permanently cancelled. Roger, bless his heart, actually walked over and shook my hand. "Jake," he whispered, "you've got your work cut out for you." Good luck. My first act as a board member, I called for a full forensic audit of the HOA's finances. Not because I expected to find anything massive. Honestly, I figured it'd be some sloppy bookkeeping, maybe a few shady purchases. But I wanted to set a new precedent: transparency. So I hired someone I trusted, Sarah Chen, the forensic accountant who'd helped me during my divorce. And almost immediately, the red flags started piling up. Contracts that were awarded without proper bidding. Services that were paid for but never performed. Expense receipts that didn't match the records in the HOA's bank statements. But the real smoking gun, it was hiding in plain sight. Those administrative consulting fees I'd spotted earlier, $18,000 a year going to Martha's brother-in-law's company. On the surface, they looked like property management charges. But Sarah dug deeper. She found invoices for services like lake water quality testing and community space optimization consulting. Fancy words. Impressive terms. Except none of those services had ever actually been provided. Not once. Knowledge nugget. When people try to hide corruption behind impressive language, the truth usually isn't buried that deep. You just have to ask the right questions and actually look at the paperwork. When an HOA threatens legal action, here's your move. Demand they prove their own compliance first. Because bullies almost never follow the rules they try to enforce. The preliminary audit findings were already damning. And I had a choice to make. Keep it quiet. Let Martha resign with a shred of dignity, or push for full accountability. The old me, the guy who spent 20 years avoiding conflict just to keep the peace in a marriage, might have taken the easy way out. But this wasn't just about me anymore. Mrs. Martinez deserved better than years of harassment over her family reunions. Bob Peterson deserved to fish in peace, not duck noise complaints at sunrise. And the dozens of residents who'd been quietly intimidated by Martha's power plays, they had a right to know that their HOA fees were being systematically misused. Besides, Martha had made this personal the moment she tried to tear down something I built with my own hands. There's a satisfaction in perfectly aligned joints, in waterproof seams, in every sanded edge and weatherproof finish. But it wasn't just carpentry. It was healing. Rebuilding. Every board I laid on that houseboat was a piece of my life being put back together. So I chose accountability. And Martha, predictably, she escalated. She started showing up at my dock, uninvited, demanding to see proof that the audit was legitimate. She filed county complaints accusing me of harassing her and the HOA board. She even tried organizing a petition to overturn the election. The final straw. She hired a private investigator. Apparently, she thought my divorce might contain something juicy, some kind of character flaw she could use to paint me as an unstable neighbor in front of the board or the community. What she found instead was a paper trail that told the real story. That I'd pushed for mediation. That I'd gone out of my way to keep the divorce civil. That while my ex-wife's attorneys wanted to go scorched earth, I was the one asking for dignity and fairness. The day after the PI showed up on her doorstep, my ex-wife called me. "Jake, I don't know what you've gotten yourself into," she said. "But some sleazy guy came around asking about our marriage. I told him the truth, that you were the most honest man I've ever met, and that our divorce had nothing to do with your character." That conversation reminded me why I'd fallen in love with her once upon a time, and why sometimes good people just aren't meant to stay married. Meanwhile, Martha was about to learn what happens when you try to crush someone who's already lost everything that mattered personally, but finally found something worth fighting for professionally. 3 months into the forensic audit, Sarah Chen called with news that changed the entire trajectory of the battle. I was sitting on my deck, watching morning mist rise off the lake. The water was still. The air smelled like cedar and coffee. Then my phone rang, with the tone I set for serious business. "Jake, you need to sit down for this," Sarah said. "I've found evidence of systematic embezzlement. The total, $127,000, over the last 3 years." The coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the deck. "Come again?" I asked, my heart pounding. "This isn't just padded contracts or a few shady expenses," she said. "Martha built an entire system, shell companies, fake invoices, diverted payments. This isn't sloppy bookkeeping. This is organized theft." The details were staggering. Those so-called lake beautification projects. The money went to companies that existed only on paper, though administrative consulting fees, payments to Martha's own relatives, for services that were never rendered. There were records of equipment purchases, gear that was never delivered, maintenance contracts, signed, billed, and paid out, yet the work was never performed. But the real kicker, the masterstroke of the whole scam, was her emergency fund management system. Martha had convinced the prior HOA board to give her authority to move community funds into high-yield investment accounts during financial emergencies. In reality, she funneled the money into personal accounts she controlled. Then she forged documentation to make it look like the funds were still intact, quietly earning interest on behalf of the HOA. "Jake," Sarah said, her voice calm but heavy. She mailed those fake financial reports through the U.S. Postal Service. That makes it federal mail fraud. And suddenly, this wasn't just about HOA rules or local complaints anymore. This was felony territory. It hit me like a wave of ice water. Embezzling from an HOA isn't just a civil issue, it's criminal. And here's the twist. The HOA's insurance policy, which could cover financial losses, required a criminal prosecution to trigger a payout. And there was more. Martha had purchased a new home during the exact period the embezzlement occurred. If charges were filed, that house could be seized under federal asset forfeiture laws. Knowledge nugget. Embezzlement from an HOA becomes a federal crime if U.S. mail is used in the fraud, and insurance companies won't pay a dime unless a criminal case is opened. But it wasn't just Martha. What Sarah discovered next hit even harder. Martha hadn't been operating alone. The property management company that overseen the HOA finances, complicit, through willful negligence. They'd rubber-stamped Martha's financial reports without reviewing them, approved shady contracts without competitive bids, failed to keep proper records. They were either grossly incompetent or quietly looking the other way. And then came the real bombshell. "There's more," Sarah said. "I found the same financial patterns at 7 other HOAs where Martha acted as a consultant over the past 5 years. This wasn't her first time. She had a system, a playbook. Martha would target small, underregulated HOAs, ones without strong financial oversight. She'd either insert herself into a leadership role or place an ally on the board. Then she'd slowly siphon money away through a network of shell companies and bogus contractors. The scope of it all was breathtaking. Martha wasn't just a petty tyrant with control issues. She was a white-collar criminal running a multi-community fraud operation. My little houseboat dispute had accidentally exposed a multi-community fraud operation. That evening, I faced a choice that would define everything that came next. Sarah had prepared a comprehensive evidence package. The district attorney's office had confirmed they were interested in prosecution. The FBI's white-collar crime unit was reviewing the case for federal charges. I could have accepted Martha's panicked offer to resolve this privately. She'd call that afternoon, her voice shaking, offering to repay the stolen funds and resign quietly if I agreed to drop the investigation. Part of me, the part that just wanted to live peacefully on my boat and renovate my grandfather's cabin, was tempted. But sitting on my deck that night, watching stars reflect off the water my grandfather had fished for 60 years, I realized this was bigger than personal peace. Mrs. Martinez and her family deserved better than to be harassed by a criminal. Bob Peterson deserved to know his HOA fees hadn't been stolen. The dozens of other community members who'd been quietly intimidated deserved justice. Besides, Martha had made her choice when she decided calling the cops on my legal houseboat was preferable to running an honest HOA. She'd escalated at every opportunity, hired expensive lawyers to intimidate me, and tried to destroy my reputation through private investigators. Now, she was about to learn that sometimes the person you're bullying knows how to fight back. The next morning, I called Sarah and told her to proceed with criminal charges. Martha's war against my houseboat was about to become a federal case. Building a case against someone who's been systematically stealing from a community requires more than just evidence. It requires a team. Over the next 2 weeks, I assembled what Sarah jokingly called the Lake Serenity Avengers. Sarah Chen, my forensic accountant, became our financial detective. Turns out she had her own Martha story. Her previous HOA president had tried to ban her teenage son's car from their driveway because it was too old and unsightly. "I hate bullies," she told me over coffee at the local diner. "And I'm really good at following money trails." Mike Rodriguez, a real estate attorney who specialized in HOA disputes, joined our team after hearing about the case through professional networks. He'd been representing HOA harassment victims for 15 years and was genuinely excited about a case with criminal implications. Most of the time, we're fighting over paint colors and parking spaces, he explained. This is actual justice. The county prosecutor, Patricia Williams, had built her career on white-collar crime. When Sarah presented our evidence package, Patricia's eyes lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. We've been looking for a case like this to demonstrate that HOA corruption has real consequences. Your Martha just became our poster child. But the real strength of our team came from the community members who'd been quietly documenting Martha's harassment for years. Bob Peterson had kept meticulous records of every noise complaint, every threatening letter, every attempt to intimidate him into compliance. Mrs. Martinez had photos of the citations Martha had placed on cars during their family gatherings. Tom Wilson, a local contractor, had documentation showing how Martha's brother-in-law consistently underbid his legitimate companies by impossible margins. Our strategy was three-pronged: legal, financial, and community-based. Mike would handle criminal prosecution support and civil asset recovery. Sarah would keep following the money trail and coordinate with federal investigators. I'd focus on documenting harassment patterns and organizing community impact statements. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Federal embezzlement charges were filed within 2 weeks. Asset seizure warrants were prepared for Martha's house, cars, and bank accounts. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit opened a formal investigation into the multi-HOA fraud operation. Knowledge nugget: fighting HOA corruption requires a team approach, forensic accountants, lawyers, and documentation specialists working together. But we knew Martha wouldn't go quietly. Patricia warned us that cornered white-collar criminals often make desperate moves. She's going to try to destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, or create enough chaos to muddy the waters. We need to be ready for anything. Community preparation was just as important. We organized weekly meetings at the community center, helping harassment victims document their experiences and prepare impact statements. The smell of fresh coffee and homemade cookies couldn't quite mask the nervous energy as people shared stories they'd kept quiet for years. Linda Morrison, no relation despite the name, had been keeping detailed records of Martha's selective enforcement. She cited me for excessive lawn ornaments when I simply put up a bird feeder. Meanwhile, the Hendersons had a full garden gnome village, and Martha never said a word. Each story revealed the same pattern. Martha targeted anyone who didn't fit her vision of lakefront living while giving free passes to her allies. The documentation was overwhelming and would be devastating in court. Meanwhile, my software development skills proved invaluable for organizing the evidence. I created a comprehensive database linking financial irregularities to specific harassment incidents, showing how Martha used manufactured conflicts to distract from her theft. Color-coded spreadsheets tracked money flows, timeline correlations, and witness statements. The technical work was oddly satisfying, like debugging code, but with real-world consequences. Every cross-reference that revealed another pattern of corruption felt like solving a puzzle piece. Martha's counter-strategy became clear when she hired a crisis management firm from the city. Suddenly, whispers spread around town about my supposed vendetta against her, rumors that my divorce had made me unstable, and suggestions that I was manipulating vulnerable elderly residents for personal gain. But her reputation management campaign backfired spectacularly. The very community members she'd harassed for years were now organizing against her. Her attempt to paint me as the villain fell flat when people remembered she'd been the one calling police on legal houseboats and filing frivolous complaints about bird feeders. The final piece of our preparation involved a media strategy. The local newspaper had been following the story since the first HOA meeting confrontation. When Patricia confirmed criminal charges were imminent, we coordinated a comprehensive evidence release that told the whole story: harassment campaign, financial fraud, community impact, and ultimate accountability. Everything was ready. Martha had spent months escalating against my houseboat, never realizing that each aggressive move was building the case against her. Now, it was time to see how she'd handle being the one under investigation. The community meeting, where everything would come to a head, was scheduled for the following week. Martha didn't know it yet, but her reign of terror was about to end very publicly. 2 days before our evidence was scheduled to go public, Martha made the kind of desperate move that turns misdemeanor corruption into federal obstruction of justice. I discovered it purely by accident when I stopped by the HOA office to pick up some old meeting minutes for our case file. The office door was propped open, and I could hear frantic typing and clicking from inside. Martha was hunched over the desktop computer, completely absorbed in whatever she was doing. The smell of nervous sweat mixed with her usually perfect perfume created an oddly human scent I'd never associated with her before. "Martha," I called out. "Everything okay?" She jumped like I'd fired a gun, spinning around with the wide-eyed panic you see in cornered animals. Her laptop sat open beside the desktop, both screens showing file transfer windows. "Jake, you startled me," she said, her voice brittle. "I'm just cleaning up some old files, organizing things for the transition." A bad lie, under obvious pressure. Here's the mini twist that sealed her fate. Martha thought she was deleting evidence. But my IT background told me otherwise. When you delete files on a computer, they don't actually vanish. They're just marked as free space until overwritten. Plus, HOA policy required automatic cloud backups of all financial records. She was essentially creating a perfect digital trail of obstruction of justice in real time. I played dumb, chatted for a few minutes about lake weather and community events, then casually mentioned that my software consulting business included data recovery services. "It's amazing what you can recover from computers these days," I said. "Even when people think files are completely gone, there are usually traces somewhere." The color drained from her face like someone had pulled the plug. That afternoon, I called Patricia and Sarah with an update. Patricia's response was immediate. "We need to secure those computers now. Destroying evidence during an active investigation is a federal crime." By evening, FBI agents had seized the HOA office computers under federal warrant. Forensic analysis revealed exactly what we suspected. Martha had tried to delete 3 years' worth of financial records, emails, and contracts. But the cloud backups preserved everything, and the deletion attempt itself became additional evidence of criminal intent. Knowledge nugget: never try to delete digital evidence. Forensic recovery often makes the crime worse than the original offense. Martha's panic escalated from there. She hired a private investigator to dig deeper into my personal life, looking for anything to discredit me as a witness. The PI showed up at my ex-wife's house, my former workplace, even my daughter's college campus. But instead of doubt, he found character witnesses. My ex-wife called me laughing. Her crisis management consultant, slick suit, force calm, took the stage first, spinning a narrative of me as the scheming antagonist, a man driven by personal grudges, financial stress, and divorce-fueled vendettas, manipulating the community with false accusations. But here's the mini twist that ended her campaign permanently. Before they could finish, Patricia Williams stepped up. She held up a stack of printed emails, financial statements, and sworn affidavits from community members. With a calm but authoritative voice, she laid out the hard truth: every fraudulent invoice, every shell company payment, every instance of harassment, backed by unassailable evidence. Then, one by one, community members took the microphone. Bob Peterson recounting the intimidation letters, Mrs. Martinez sharing photos of the family gathering citations, Linda Morrison detailing selective enforcement abuses, and even my ex-wife giving a brief, heartfelt statement about my integrity. The room buzzed with a collective energy, relief, validation, and a deep sense of justice finally being served. Martha's face drained of color, her carefully crafted facade crumbling in front of 150 witnesses, federal agents, and a media frenzy. When the last statement echoed into silence, Patricia concluded, "This isn't just about HOA rules or petty neighborhood squabbles. This is criminal fraud, federal mail fraud, and obstruction of justice. The evidence is overwhelming, and the community deserves transparency and accountability." Martha's desperate last attempt to manipulate public opinion had backfired spectacularly. The crowd erupted into applause, cheers rising above the hum of cameras. The final chapter of Martha's reign of terror had been written, not with lies, but with truth, community strength, and unwavering resolve. The room was thick with tension as neighbors whispered in stunned disbelief. The veneer of civility Martha had so carefully maintained had shattered, revealing a bitter core of exclusion and prejudice. Mrs. Martinez was the first to break the silence, her voice steady but filled with quiet strength. This isn't about standards or property values. This is about power and control. And it's about time we took that power back. One by one, more residents rose, some clutching documentation, others simply nodding in agreement. The community, once fractured by fear and intimidation, was now united in outrage and resolve. Channel 7's live stream picked up the murmurs and cheers, broadcasting a wave of defiance spreading through Lake Serenity. Martha's consultant glanced nervously at the growing crowd, realizing the narrative had flipped completely. Patricia Williams leaned forward and addressed the room, her tone firm but hopeful. This community desires transparency, justice, and respect. What you've seen tonight is only the beginning of holding those accountable who abuse trust. The meeting ended not with a vote or a statement from the HOA president, but with the community taking its first collective steps toward healing and reclaiming their lakefront home. The room buzzed with anticipation as the county commissioner called the meeting to order. The usual murmurs of polite small talk were replaced by a charged silence, heavy with expectation. I began the presentation, my voice steady as I walked the crowd through the timeline. Every financial anomaly, every forged invoice, every shady contract was laid bare on the screen behind me. Sarah's charts illuminated the pathways of stolen money, tracing the complex web Martha had spun. When I finished, Patricia stepped up. Her tone was firm but measured as she outlined the charges, emphasizing that this was more than just theft. It was a betrayal of trust that impacted every family around the lake. Martha sat stone-faced but visibly shaken, her lawyer whispering urgently in her ear. The crowd's reaction was a mixture of anger, relief, and vindication. People who had once been silenced or fearful now spoke openly, sharing how Martha's actions had affected their lives. The county commissioners unanimously expressed support for the prosecution and promised reforms to prevent future abuses. New oversight policies were proposed, including mandatory external audits and transparent financial reporting for all HOAs in the county. Outside, news crews swarmed the steps, capturing the moment this small community took a stand. Martha's house was already under federal seizure orders, and her legal battles had only just begun. But the most important victory was the restoration of faith in Lake Serenity, a community once divided, now united and vigilant. The room grew silent, all eyes fixed on the screen behind me as the photos, documents, and timelines unfolded. I spoke clearly, weaving the narrative between the images. This isn't just about one man's fight against an unfair HOA president. It's about a community betrayed. About stolen funds that should have maintained our parks, our roads, our safety, money that disappeared into private pockets. I clicked to the next slide, a color-coded flowchart tracing the embezzled money directly to Martha's brother-in-law's company and to lavish personal expenses. Every citation against families like the Martinezes, every baseless complaint about my houseboat, every intimidation tactic was a smokescreen, a distraction from the theft and corruption happening behind closed doors. The crowd murmured, some nodding, others wiping tears. Commissioner Davis leaned forward, her stern expression softening. This was real, and the weight of it settled on everyone present. Then I concluded, HOAs are supposed to protect communities, not prey on them. When those in power abuse that trust, it's our duty to shine a light, to stand up, and to demand accountability. Today, we do just that. As I stepped down, Patricia rose again, announcing the next steps in the legal process and promising ongoing transparency to restore trust. The community erupted into applause, not just for justice, but for the courage of everyone who had come forward.